sequoia are now going to grow in northern British Columbia, because I don't know exactly why it came out that way. My guess would be that the suitable conditions are farther south than that. But look what happened here. So balsam fir now can occur much farther north and has invaded areas that were previously tundra. And so that's the tundra disappearing up there. And it disappears from these areas. Balsam fir is common in the Appalachians and won't be there anymore. And then Pitelka2 moves. And so, but the important point here is that the ranges overlap. So there was never a threat that balsam fir would actually disappear. Whereas, look at what, if this was true, look at how far giant sequoia have to migrate, and even the Pitelka2. And so this is an example of a narrowly distributed species at more risk, because whether this could occur seems pretty unlikely. Now, the other thing you don't want to go tell anybody is that the giant sequoias are going to disappear in the next few decades. You know that, and we could be talking about coast redwood too. These things can grow, tolerate a lot of variation in climate, and you know that people have redwoods in places like Atascadero. Of course, they're watering them, but the redwoods can tolerate much warmer temperatures, especially if they're getting a lot of water. And those species are the individuals of those species are pretty resilient. So giant sequoia will be up there for many, many decades, but they'll stop reproducing. And so we'll know that they're going to disappear eventually. So, we have species that lots of people don't care about, and we have species that people care about. These are iconic species for California. In a study of how people in Massachusetts, how much they cared about climate change, when they found out that sugar maple would no longer, or in Vermont, I should say, be in Vermont, that was important because you associate maple syrup with sugar maple from Vermont. So in California, obviously redwoods and giant sequoia mean a lot to a lot of people. So that's what we're facing. And here's an example of just two other species and the fact that there are going to be big effects for them too. These are really important around here, blue oak and valley oak. And so these maps here are for blue oak, these maps here are for valley oak, and these are two different climate models. And what's shown here is where they disappear from, and that's the main one I want to focus on, is that blue oak pretty much disappears from our area, except when you get farther inland. Valley oak persists more. The other interesting thing here is that the green shows where the species is going to expand, where it doesn't grow now, but it will grow under the future climate. And what do you notice here? Well, most of it's in the northern part of California. So that's part of the latitudinal shift northward as climate zones go there. It can also move into the mountains where it's now too cool for it to grow, and so you see that too in the green in these slides. How are we doing here? Better finish up. So going back to San Luis Obispo County, I just want to say that here we may, we have some things to have hope about. One is that we have a lot of really dramatic local environmental gradients, the same that characterize California, but we have them all in our county, including resulting from distance from the coast, elevation, aspect, which is the direction that a slope points. So we have north-facing slopes that face towards the north, and they'll have forest on them, and south-facing slopes that have chaparral or grassland on them because they're much hotter and drier. You can see that around here all over the place. And different soils. And so species that grow around here, many of them won't have to migrate 1,000 kilometers to the north over time. Well, they probably will migrate north, but they also may be able to simply move to a different microclimate within that's fairly close by moving from, say, the south face of a slope to the north to a north-facing slope. And this is just an example of what we see everywhere around here. In this photograph, which was taken on Highway 101 just north of San Luis Obispo before you start going up the grade, you can see a number of different vegetation types here. There's grassland. There's to be able to see. There's chaparral in here, up there. There's along a stream down here. There's a mixed forest. These are serpentine outcrops that you can see a different shade from the grassland. And then there are oak forest up here, and you can also spot some conifers. I'm not sure what they are, whether they're gray pine or what, at higher elevations. So simply moving around, these are a lot of the factors that determine this are differences in microclimate. And so to the extent that that's true, a species may move fairly short distances and be able to survive. And a study was done some time ago, actually not that long ago, by a group headed by somebody named Laurie, where they were looking at potential effects of climate change on plant diversity in California. And they concluded that 1/3 of all species may go extinct if they are unable to move to new areas. And new areas may be hundreds of miles away, but as I just pointed out, they might be very close by. And they actually said that the coast ranges of Central California are expected to be important refuges for species, meaning that lots of different species will find suitable areas to live. So very quickly, just some conclusions. Climatic change will cause major shifts in vegetation zones towards the poles by 1,000 kilometers or more and up in elevation. This will change the character of vegetation in all sorts of ways, just the appearance, what we see, but there can be economically and recreationally important changes. Fire regimes are likely to change, causing further changes in vegetation. For species, climate change will cause the ranges of most species to shift significantly. That's the same thing as saying vegetation zones will shift. It will cause widespread local extinctions. Local extinctions means it disappears from this particular area but survives somewhere else. But it'll cause some global extinctions, like in South Africa. Species may or may not be able to migrate fast enough to keep up with climate zones, and you can't predict exactly which species will go extinct, but you can identify high-risk groups, and I did talk about those at high risk. Now, I've been talking about model projections, basically, what we can expect in the future, and I said, don't take those projections all literally, take them seriously. But this is already happening, so we're not predicting things that we haven't observed yet. For decades, scientists, sometimes not necessarily because they were interested in climate change, have been keeping track of where species occur, and also, for instance, when they bloom, or when birds arrive in the spring, or when flowers come out. And those records now are showing that there are changes over time. And so this is just a summary from a California EPA report that came out last year, and just a few examples. In Southern California, trees and shrubs have moved up over 200 feet in elevation in the past 30 years. The lower range of trees has moved up and desert shrubs are invading. In the Central Valley, butterflies have been appearing earlier for the past 40 years, progressively earlier. And in the Sierra Nevada, small mammals are expanding their ranges higher and retreating from lower elevations. So finally, I want to give you an opportunity to become involved in climate change research. This is a project called Project Budburst, and it's basically a citizen science project. Citizen science means that anybody can actually participate and help collect data and contribute to a serious scientific effort. So anybody can be involved in this project, and it basically means you go out and you pick a plant, a favorite kind of plant, favorite species, a favorite individual in your backyard or somewhere else, and then you keep records on when it, if it's a tree, when does it leaf out in the spring, when does it flower, when do fruits set, when do fruits drop, when do the leaves drop in the fall. It's entirely internet-based. It's national in scope. All 50 states have participants. And the data are submitted to Project Budburst and then are freely accessible to all. Classes in a school could have a favorite plant that they keep track of and submit that data. And what you're monitoring is what's called phenology, which is the seasonal pattern of growth in plants when they put out leaves, etc. And I just stuck it in here because it's cool. Phenology can be observed by you watching an individual plant. It can also be observed from space. And so this just shows the annual greening of the earth as a result of seasonal changes. So in the winter, it's not very green over much of the area, and it's a little less dramatic down here, but you can really see it here. And that's all of it. But the other thing that they discovered by looking at these patterns over many different years is that the greening was extending farther north over time. So again, that reflects the moving north of vegetation zones and climate zones. So if you're interested in Project Budburst, it's a very complicated web address there. And then I'll leave this up here. If you're interested, in 2010, there was a California EPA report that I mentioned on indicators of climate change. And it's just the evidence from California showing that climate is changing. And it's not just ecological, it's all different kinds of indicators. And then this is the report on San Luis Obispo County that again is not just ecological information, but all sorts of things. Thank you. Yeah, questions for me or anybody, I guess. Yeah?
Do you think the demise of the aspen in the Rockies, lower Rockies, and secondly, how are the grains and the migrated corn and wheat that you care about a lot, how are they going to be going up?
Actually, those are basically too specific for me. The aspen one I'm not that familiar with, but I think a lot of people know that pine bark beetle is a huge problem over much of the West, for lodgepole pine in particular, and a major reason for that is that the beetle can now fit in 2 generations in 1 year, 1 growing season, 1 summer. Previously, it was too cold in the spring and the fall, and now it's warmed up enough so they can do 2 generations. And that's been a major factor in contributing to incredibly widespread decline, death of huge stands of lodgepole pine. I can't remember what was, I don't think I knew the answer to the other one. Yeah. Well, I mean, grains are big in Alberta and places like that. So grains, I think, are the least of our problem, probably. Some other species, agricultural species, are important. The other thing I didn't mention, of course, is in terms of the migration of native species, is that people are seriously thinking in terms of assisted migration, that organizations would actually collect seeds or small plants and plant them in new places. And unfortunately, I think a lot of conservation groups haven't really thought about this yet. I'm reminded of when I lived in Maryland. I was on the board of the Nature Conservancy, and they had a project where they were getting volunteers together to go plant, I think it was black spruce up in this area in the mountains of Maryland where it had existed before, and they were trying to essentially recreate the habitat that had existed before. And I said, why are you doing that? Black spruce isn't going to be able to survive there in 50 years, and they hadn't thought about it. And now the Nature Conservancy is much more aware of climate change, but they weren't back then. Yep. Again, don't take it literally. I think that was because one possibility is that if you look at the climate models, and don't take them literally, take them seriously, they differ vastly in what they predict about precipitation. And you hear climate scientists saying all the time it's much more difficult to predict effects of climate change on precipitation, whether it'll go up or down. And they talk about dry models and wet models, especially in the context of a particular area. So I know that one model predicts that rainfall will go up in much of California, another predicts it'll go down. And so that could have been a situation where it was, that was a prediction. Another possibility is that if fire is real frequent, it favors grasses over shrubs or trees. And that's actually a serious problem in parts of Southern California. I've learned not too long ago that chaparral is at risk because the frequent fires are causing it to be replaced by grassland. So, it depends upon how you define grassland or desert, but in say the southeastern part of California, it could be that more frequent fires. I'm a frequent flyer. That's why I said that, because I'm so used to saying frequent flyer. That frequent fires could be causing, not that it's becoming wetter, but simply that grasses will grow more than the desert vegetation. Yeah. Well, yeah, he's wondering about the projections for blue oak, and he pointed out that blue oak also do well in the foothills of the Sierra. Well, they basically have the same. The foothills of the Sierra have the same climate as we do, essentially. No, not. Where do you live? Well, I do too. It's pretty hot there. I don't think it gets hotter up. It doesn't get hotter in the foothills of the Sierra. At times, maybe, but what the projection showed is that blue oak would head farther north in California. Also, it'll head up in elevation, and so because we have mountains here, blue oak, I don't believe it'll disappear completely. The problem with that. You notice that the map showed little squares. That's the resolution of that model, and it's 10 kilometers on a side. So it's missing a lot of the microclimate variation we have. And so it's saying that blue oak will disappear completely. But what I said afterwards in terms of our microclimatic gradients is that blue oak will probably move up higher into the coast ranges or to a different microclimate. Okay.
I would thank you very much. Suggest if you have questions, we can stick around for a couple of minutes and ask them. I do want to remind you about next week. I'm really looking forward to it. We will start off with Dr. Shelley Hurst, political scientist from California. She's going to be she's an expert in technology transfer, as well as international relations. So the interplay between private and government, development of technology, and how we can cooperate with the Chinese in developing alternative energy sources. She'll be talking about that. And the second one, Beach Court will be talking about alternative energy sources, comparing them with fossil fuels. So both of those could be really very interesting. So I encourage you all to come. I think there are a couple of extra spots available, so if you have friends who want to come on in, they can get in when there's spots available in the building. Thank you.